Dear student, we will continue with the modern synthetic theory, and we were discussing the types of natural selection in terms of modern synthetic theory. And on this basis, we divide the natural selection into three different categories: directional, stabilizing, and disruptive. So, first, we'll discuss the directional selection. It occurs when the selective pressure favors on one extreme variation of a trait and produces a regular change in the gene pool of a population in one direction with respect to one or some specific character. It is progressive selection and is seen in response to directional selection in the environment for a long time. So, in one direction, particular trait is selected over a period of time in the successive generation. This is called directional selection. For example, evolution of man, horse, industrial melanism, DDT, or antibiotic resistance. They're all example of directional selection. I'll be discussing DDT sensitive example. This is also a kind of natural selection. So here you will see that DDT sensitive and DDT resistant, two different variant are there in a population of insect. And in absence of DDT resistance had no additional adaptability or survival over DDT sensitivity. So there is no selection pressure. But in presence of DDT, that is the selection pressure, natural selection is operated. The DDT resistance population increases over a period of time, and the entire population become the DDT resistance. Okay, because DDT sensitive, they could not adapt according to the changing circumstances. Okay, now stabilizing selection occur when the selective pressure favors the average phenotype. This type of selection favors the average or normal phenotype and eliminate the extreme variants. It occurs in a constant changing environment and eliminate new mutations, variation of the size of flower. Okay, so for example, short flower die, no sunlight, medium flower leaf, perfect condition, tall flower die, wind damages. So average phenotype is favored, which can survive in moderate, you can say, in sunlight also and in the wind also, little wind. Okay, so heterozygote superiority, for example, in sickle cell anemia is the example of stabilizing selection. So we'll just discuss this example of heterozygote. Okay. So I'll be discussing it with balanced polymorphism, or I can discuss. Okay. Another example is sickle cell trait, which is displays the heterozygote superiority. It is a genetic disorder where the mutation in B gene of beta globin gene of hemoglobin, and as a result, protein is altered. So RBC they turn to sickle shape. Now, such RBC carry less oxygen and they are ruptured when enters the blood capillaries, and this causes lysis of the RBC or hemolytic anemia. The homozygous form of sickle cell anemia is lethal, but heterozygous have an advantage to become malaria resistant. The malaria parasite Plasmodium falciparum lives in normal RBC but cannot grow in the sickle shape RBC. So here the homozygous for sickle cell anemia, they are not selected. Okay, but only the selected are the heterozygotes. So the average phenotype is selected. Okay, so this is what we mean by the average population is favored. Now disruptive or diversifying selection favor the extreme traits. Okay, for the survival, while the average phenotype declines, this type of selection act to break up a previously homogeneous population into several different adaptive norms. In an environment with black and white rock, white rabbit lived due to camouflage, gray rabbit dies as seen by predator, and black rabbit live due to camouflage. So the middle one is not surviving. So extremes are surviving, white and black. Okay, so this is called disruptive selection. Now if you understand this graph, here frequency of individual and this is the phenotype. So we'll just assume that any animal is there with the fur. Okay, so this is without fur and this is with fur. So direction, so if you see original population, how it gets stabilized. Okay, so from non-fur to the fur. Okay, so these are the different type of variation it has undergone, and they are all surviving. Now let's consider, so this is the original graph. If you see, this is favored in the, okay, now we will see that how the directional selection is favored. So original population, this is the graph of their variation. If suppose this particular is favored in a direction, okay, means the animal with a fur they keep favoring in the subsequent generations. Okay, so what will happen, this is favored with a more fur, and so peak will be of this, and it has arise from this. So slowly there were changes, and further this changes now, you can say stabilize in the population. So this is a directional selection because it has favored in one direction over the period of time. So this is the original population, and this is the graph of new population after the direction selection is operated. Similarly, when the stabilizing selection is operated, so extremes are not favored, the average population is favored. So some with few good furs are favored, whereas the one with very much fur are not favored, the one with the least fur are also not favored. So here is the peak, and this is the stabilized population. So here this is the example of stabilized, and if you compare with the original population, this is the graph of stabilizing selection. Now disruptive selection, extreme are either the without fur are favored because of some reason, or with more fur are favored. So the peak will be here. Okay, and then they decline because the population has to stabilize at some point. Okay, so the average, whatever are the average for population, they are not surviving. So this helps you to identify the three different selection, or study the three different selection in the form of graph. Now we'll just see what is polymorphism. Genetic polymorphism is the condition in which a population possesses more than one allele at a locus. Polymorphism play important role in genetic adaptation. Based on this, there are two types: balanced polymorphism and transient polymorphism. Balance means the polymorphism remain constant in subsequent generation. AB blood group, they display constant polymorphism because none of the blood group or the genes controlling them have any selective advantage or disadvantage. Okay, so another example is sickle cell trait. This we have already discussed. Transient polymorphism means polymorphism undergoing strong selection pressure, means it's changing. So in this form, allele is strongly favored. Industrial melanism. So it is also example of directional selection, but one particular allele is favored because of the changes in the environment. So this is example of transient polymorphism. So there exists the polymorphism in the gene according to the requirement, and some of them become settled, you can say, in the gene pool. So that is called balance, and some of them they keep changing because the requirement is such, so they are called transient. Then we have so stabilized natural selection. We have the example of sickle cell anemia is the example of stabilized natural selection. Um, Now we will see concept of species. A species is a group of organism that interbreed freely with one another to produce the fertile offspring and is reproductively isolated from one organism. Okay, species are separated from one another by pre-zygotic or post-zygotic barrier which prevent mating. So, speciation is the origin of evolution of new species, and the new species are continuously formed from the population from the pre-existing population by gradual modification in their morphology, genotype, and isolation of these population to prevent the free gene flow among their members. So this is one of the important concept. When new species arises from the you can say from the existing population, then that new population has to separate um, for successive generation to be a new species, and they should not interbreed with a you can say the population from where they are separated or isolated. This is free gene flow. So there is free gene flow among the member of species. Okay, and mechanism is a splitting of single evolutionary lineage into two or more genetically independent lineage. So now there are type of speciation. We'll just go through this. See, allopatric and sympatric. If the continent split or a mountain range arise, one population can split into two by barrier. For the two species live in separate environment, and therefore there is no gene flow between these two species. Groups of population. They are now adapted to new environment or different geographic area. So in this way, allopatric species are formed. So allopatric species speciation is the gradual and supposed to be the product of natural selection. Okay, so here this is separated by barrier. Now sympatric speciation involves the evolution of new species from the ancestor without separation of geographical area. They evolve by polyploidy hybridization, and the formation of new species occur at fast rate and involve polymorphism, polyploidy in tobacco. We'll just also discuss what is adaptive radiation. It is the process in which the organism diversify rapidly from the ancestral species into a multitude of new form, particularly when the change in the environment makes new resources available or open new environmental niche. Example, Darwin finches, even the marsupial radiation is also example of this. Development of mammals after extinction of dinosaurs in the beginning of Paleogene period, and the mammals radiated and adapted to different running, leaping, climbing, swimming, flying. The Darwin finches radiated to different niche due to the intra-specific competition. The natural selection helped them to adapt to new niches after diversifying. They had better chances of survival. Okay. Reproductive isolation is the inability of a species to breed successfully with a related species due to geographical behavior, physiological, or genetic barriers. So there are so many barriers that exist. So this is called reproductive isolation. It is essential in the process of speciation. It prevents the nascent species from interbreeding. Isolation mechanism operate as prezygotic mechanism and postzygotic mechanism. Prezygote prevent the formation of viable zygote, and postzygotic prevent the hybrid passing on their gene, that is hybrid sterility. The two species mate but offspring is infertile. Microevolution, the type is divergent and convergent. Evolution at large scale is called macroevolution, and at the small it is called microevolution. So divergent, it occur when two different species share a common ancestor, and two species exhibit homology. Speciation is an important result of divergent evolution. Example, finches. Convergent is occur due to when two different species do not share a common ancestor but have developed similar characteristic to adaptation to similar environment, and they exhibit analogy. Now here I'll take one example and explain both the thing. Let's take the radiation of marsupials. So mammals are there, they were the common ancestor, they were mammals which were common ancestor for marsupial and placental mammals. So divergence occurs, and some of them converted into placental and some of them transformed to marsupial. So marsupial, these were in other part of the world, but marsupial from the North America they migrated to Australia. Okay, and some as you have seen earlier, these were connected, the land were connected, so they migrated to Australia and via Antarctica. So it was around early tertiary period they get migrated, and today they are endemic species of Australia. You cannot see marsupial anywhere else in the world because Australia got separated as a landmass from rest of the landmass at very early stage. So you will see in Australia subcontinent, that is you will also see in the New Zealand. Okay, so now what will happen, these marsupial they arise on you can say Australia, and they get adapted to their environment, and they are all marsupial: Tasmanian wolf, tiger, cat, marsupial rat, kangaroo, wombat, bandicoot which is rat like animal, koala which is bear like animal. Okay, so here this is the example of divergence and adaptive radiation. So it's the process in which organisms diversify rapidly from ancestor species into multitude of new forms. Okay, particularly when the change in the environment makes new resources available and create new challenges and open the new environmental niches. So they specify their habitat which is called a niche, and they started living there because they are getting food over there and other resources which is requirement for the life they obtain there. So this is how the radiation of, or the adaptive radiation comes um, as a point as a mode of evolution. Okay, now the evolution of Australian marsupial from the single ancestor stock in the Australian subcontinent is the example of divergent evolution. We can also say homology because their origin is common. Okay, so we say now again you need to understand something: the placental mammal, okay, and the marsupial are two different lineages. Okay, so their origin is same, but now they are independently developing into the new lineages. Okay, they have independently evolved in the similar way. But what happened, the marsupials in the Australia and the placental mammal in the other part of the world, they were evolving in the similar fashion, you can say. As a result, their descendant are similar. So that's why you can see the koala look like bear and the bandicoot look like a rat, which is a mammal. Therefore, the evolution of marsupial in Australia and evolution of placental mammal in the other part of the world is the example of parallel evolution. This evolution we call it as a parallel evolution. Now you consider the example of flying squirrel, which is in the North America, which is a placental mammal, and sugar glider, which is marsupial of Australia. They are nocturnal tree dwellers with large eye, fur coat. They have same lifestyle, physical trait, but they evolve independently and they have different origin. So this is the example of convergent evolution. So as each lineage evolve independently, so they exhibit analogy. Okay, so here this example explains the different aspect of this example explain the different types of evolution. So here we complete the evolution. Thank you.